Hello, and welcome to Course 5 Compass Live. Thank you very much for joining. This is episode 4. It's December 15th, 2020. We're going to talk today about the last mile of analytics. Not lost in translation, but found in translation. I'm joined by Ashish Braganza. I'll introduce Ashish in a minute, but to set up the topic, according to a recent survey by Gartner, 54% of marketing decisions are being made only 54% are being influenced by marketing analytics. Another Gartner study recently published described that by 2023, 60% of CMOs will cut the size of their marketing analytics departments in half because of what they consider to be failed improvements. These are stark numbers. This is not how it was supposed to be. Analytics was supposed to be the chosen path, data shaping strategy. Something isn't happening. Something is getting lost in translation. And our guest today, Ashish Braganza, believes that perhaps the issue is in the last mile of analytics. Ashish graduated from Temple University in Philadelphia with an MS in marketing. He then joined Comcast, where he and I worked together. He was on the .com side of the business. I was on the .net side. He was focused on transactions and bringing new customers in. I was focused on analyzing engagement of those customers. He went on from Comcast to have roles in the technology industry and in the financial services industry. So we have as our guest today someone with deep experience in analytics across 14, 15 years in a variety of industries. I'm really excited to welcome my friend Ashish Braganza to Course 5 Compass Live. Welcome, Ashish.
Hey, David. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and get to talk to you. It's like old times at Comcast.
Yeah, right.
It's
exactly. Sitting in Ralph's Cafe.
Analytics amongst friends. So this is going to be analytics between two friends, maybe.
Well, just like old times, let's solve the world's problems. One of these problems is there appear to be some challenges around using data. Maybe it's an adoption issue. What's going on here?
Well, I've had the opportunity to work in many different industries now, and I think consistently what I'm seeing is that with data science being very specialized now, I call it the last mile, and I take this from actually from Comcast from cable language, which where Comcast has to run the last mile to the customer's house. Right, so the last mile was always the problem. So you could lay a fiber optic cable, and then you from the node to the house. That was where. So I took that. I kind of have used that language as the last mile problem for data analytics back from our cable days. But that's exactly what we're seeing, and that's exactly what I've seen is where you have these enterprise data science teams build all these really big and great models and things like that. And very often they move on to other projects, and the models don't get implemented into the business units, or the business units don't see value from the implementation. So it's the last mile is always a people problem. It is not a math or a science problem. And that's what I call it lost in translation, is because it is it's a human problem. And the need, I've realized that there's a great need for analytic translators. You can call them applied analysts, or there are different terms, but translators is what I would term them as, and that's what I've seen.
So in that analogy, the data scientists might be the fiber optic cable and all the technology in the back end of a network. The business user, if I'm understanding this correctly, is maybe the home, the consumer. Mm-hmm. And what's missing is this last mile piece to sort of join all of the analysis and high capacity work that's happening on the data science side with the needs of the business, the consumer. And so it sounds like you're describing a need for people with special skills to connect the two of those.
Correct. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So that's where the handoff occurs, and I'm actually going to quote Jim Stern on this. So Jim Stern and I had this conversation a few years ago at the DAA Hub, and Jim had a good analogy. He says he had a plane analogy, like it was like flying a plane, and he talks about it. He says that the pilot is applied analytics, where the pilot is looking at the instrumentation, the orchestration of that instrumentation to fly people successfully from point A to point B safely. But then the data science folks are the aeronautical engineers, where they need to know how the jets or the turbines work, but they are not necessarily the pilots, and you need a blend of both the skills for a successful team. And very often I've seen teams focus a lot because, data science is the buzzword, and AI, ML now is the buzzword. So there's a lot of focus on technology and process and math and all of that, but very little focus on how do you translate that into value into the business unit. And it could mean a lot of different things. It could mean just, regularly engaging with your stakeholder, having client meetings, project management, training. It has many different elements to it, and also people playing those roles need to understand the data science model just enough. But you don't have to understand how the engine works thoroughly, and you need to understand the feedback that you're getting from the engine and the input and the output. You don't need to necessarily know how the engine is built, but you have to have a good understanding of what data is going in and what's coming out. So,
interesting. Yeah. I actually take a fair amount of comfort from that, maybe because I'm not a technical person, and maybe some of our listeners fall into this category. Not a technical person in the sense that I am comfortable writing code, and I'm also maybe not as savvy a business operator as some of people that I've worked for in the past. I sometimes come away from meetings with say a CFO, for example, and just think, wow, okay, there's a lot there that I didn't understand or that I'm learning quite a bit. And sometimes I've looked at my role there and thought, well, what do I do? I'm not really technical. I'm not maybe a CFO. I don't have that financial background or management background quite as much. If anything, maybe I err on the side of the business side of things. But you're kind of giving me hope in the sense that there's still value that I can play, and maybe there's others who fall into this category by being the mesh between those two distinct groups. Whereas I think in the past, I think we expected our data people to be more business oriented, or we expected our business people to be more data oriented. This maybe emerging class is indicating that there's value in the middle. So, and you mentioned some of the skills. What's the right amount of technical, or what's the right amount of business experience here? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we all want those magical unicorns, and pink squirrels is what I call them. Data people who understand the business and who can program and code at the same time, and maybe they exist in the marketplace. But for a lot of organizations, the demand outstrips the supply, and I think there is a delineation or a specialization of talent that you need for each of those functions. If for you to be a good data science and a good data scientist, Python and programming and all of that in your Jupyter notebooks, and have at it. But then if you're going to take that same data scientist and have them spend time engaging with the business and completely being project managing and trying to run adoption of those models into the business and help with the training, and it takes away from their time also. So I think, now, not to say that it can't be done. Absolutely. I mean, there's no like formula that says you have to have this in the model. Now, there could be people who are fine doing everything, but then just know that there's also a need for specialization in certain roles. And I think that's where I'm seeing the need for it. And again, it's a demand supply equation. If you had a lot of people who could do everything, sure, why not? But that's not realistic. and hence there's a need in the marketplace for a separation between the data science folks and then the analytics translator folks. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So we love to hear from our audience and welcome questions. So please do go ahead and submit those. It looks like we've got a great comment from our friend Chris Johansson, who says he feels smarter just seeing both of us together. I always feel smarter anytime I spend time with Chris. So thanks for joining, Chris. So I was speaking recently with a Gartner analyst, Jorgen Heisenberg, we were talking about this role, actually, this concept of a data translator, and Jorgen mentioned the idea that he sees this as an emerging category of talent, of people within the data analytics ecosystem, and that he was starting to see them emerge from within an organization. So let's talk about where you go about finding these people. Is this the kind of person that that is just going to, I guess, already understand the business and start to sort of present themselves, or can you find these people externally? Any thoughts on where to find data translators?
It's always nice to find people inside an organization because they come to the table knowing your business pretty deeply, because data translators need business domain knowledge, a deep business domain knowledge to be effective in their roles. So it's preferable to look internally. But again, we don't live in a world of absolutes. So sometimes it's not possible to find these people internally. So I would say look at people, candidates if you're hiring candidates who worked in the industry, who have deep domain knowledge. And that's what I've done. As I've moved from various industries, I have a broad understanding of data analytics, but then I've hired people with domain knowledge I've worked in asset management, I've worked in wealth management, technology and media, but in industries where I didn't have the domain knowledge, I've supplemented it through hiring analytic translators who have that domain knowledge expertise that then I can apply directly into the business. Now, sometimes I've done both, internal and external. My preference is internal, though.
Mm-hmm. So, and maybe that's a function of the fact that this is still an emerging class of people. I remember my first role in analytics, I didn't have any previous experience, and that's because there weren't that many of us. There was a supply-demand thing there. Supply was low, demand was high, and so the company, in this case Comcast, was willing to take a bit of a gamble, or at least people there were willing to take a bit of a gamble on me. And maybe that's what we're seeing here, where initially people will more emerge through existing talent pools in an organization, either on the business side or on the analytics side, having an interest or a propensity to work in one of those two areas, or have some expertise there. And then over time, perhaps a couple of years down the road, maybe we'll see more, I guess, consistent, maybe a regimented discipline with, things like this skill set represented in the DAA competency framework, for example. Perhaps over time that will emerge more clearly.
Yeah, and I also see people emerging in different business units. So let me give you an example. When we talk about HR analytics now, or we talk about financial analytics, it's not just understanding the business, but understanding that domain knowledge is also extended to that function. So functional domain knowledge. So because I run an enterprise team, and I've run a couple of enterprise teams now, and you have very, very distinct problems to actually go solve for. So one is knowing the business, and two is understanding what function. So for example, supply chain and supply chain analytics has a completely different you need deep understanding for the mechanics of supply chain analytics versus marketing analytics. Likewise for HR analytics, and each of these are different business problems. But I think hiring people internally. So when I look to hire internally, I also look at the functional area. So say if we're working on on an HR analytics problem, it's preferable to hire someone from the HR team to actually play the role of that HR analyst, so that we can build models as it relates to attrition, like employee attrition or things like that, right? So it's not just understanding the business, but it's also understanding the function, because for different functions we have different analytical needs.
Right. You referred me to a McKinsey study that I think it's called "Rise of the Analytics Translators." And from that, I took a quote about this. It said, "Domain knowledge is by far the most important skill for any translator. Translators must be experts in both their industry and the company to effectively identify the value of AI and analytics in the business context." And that actually seems to relate to a statement that we have from one of our listeners today. Monica Tambe says, multitasking should be the key ability that the entrepreneurs look for, but specialization should not be disregarded. So here, I mean, you could apply that to analytics as well, that there's this balance between being able to do multiple things, but also being able to specialize in one particular area.
Yeah, I mean, that's to say, like, the best example is healthcare, right? You have your GP or your general practitioner, but then you have your cardiologist, your pulmonologist, your gastroenterologist, like people who are like really specialized in certain areas, right? And increasingly, we're going to see that specialization. It's not to say that like your GP has a certain need, like, and you need your family doctor. But if you have a very specific condition or problem, you have to get really specialized, and you cannot just be a general practitioner, right? So that dynamic is coming to play into this, and that's why the analytic practitioners will have also deep domain knowledge or deep vertical expertise also at different facets of different units, right? So that's what understanding the problem is, that there is specialization that's needed too.
Right. Yeah, I think that's probably the balance. I mean, I guess I wouldn't necessarily want to rest on my laurels that I have a particular area of expertise. Also, that there's a need to continually learn and grow and expand your expertise. One of our watchers has indicated, they've asked, can we provide more insights and roles and responsibilities for marketing analytics? And I think that is right in line with what we're talking about here. So if you're a practitioner in this space, and you think that you may be well suited for a data translator role, any advice on what you should do? Maybe you're not in one of those roles right now. You're not even sure where to find them, but it just feels like being in the middle feels like a good place for you. Any suggestions on either skills to acquire or places to look for these kinds of roles?
So I generally look at roles for applied analytics, applied business intelligence. Those are the types of roles when it relates to marketing analytics. So let's just step through a problem, right? And this is a classic problem I've kind of encountered in the past. We needed to build a marketing attribution model. Now, the attribution model was built by the data science team. We tried multiple different attribution models, and a Markov chain, and all the fancy terms and all the fancy methodologies. But then I needed an analyst, an analytics translator, to work with the different marketing managers to go implement that model, get the data, like help them understand what the output of the model was, help them use the model in a way that they can run their program. So those marketing analysts had even, like, they knew, for example, what does it take to even run an email campaign? Getting into the mechanics of it. What is the orchestration and activation layer? Is it what's the email service provider? Like that level of detail and specificity, because the data science team didn't need that. They just needed to build the attribution model. But the marketing analysts needed to get into the weeds as to, for paid search, or for display buying, what was the DSP and what was the DMP and the DSP connection? Like, where is that intelligence going to be pushed into and having that deep understanding was pretty critical. So I didn't need that from my data science team, but I needed that from my marketing analyst to be deeply engaged in the orchestration and activation of that attribution model with those marketing managers who ran those various marketing channels. So I just wanted to give you a flavor of both, from both ends, as to, one's the data science realm and one's the analytics translator type function. So,
and they're distinct from each other.
Yeah,
it's like in any of these cases, curiosity is important, like a desire to be a problem solver. But the way you apply that curiosity is quite a bit different. A curiosity from a data scientist, for example, might be manifest in looking for additional data to support a hypothesis. Curiosity from a data translator might be more looking to solve a big picture need instead of maybe a smaller focus kind of need.
Yeah, and focused on business outcomes, right? What are the business outcomes that you're actually, what's the business outcome that this model is going to, so think of it as return on investment or return on ad spend. So we're talking about those types of financial KPIs, or what's the business outcome that the model is going to drive. The science teams are generally focused on which model is the best fit and things like that. What's their recall versus I'm forgetting all the words right now, but they're more focused on what type of model best describes the problem. The analytics translators are more focused on outcomes and impact. How can I take this model and drive impact out of it? How can I take this model and drive a business outcome from it?
Interesting. Yeah, I guess to that point, if you're not curious about your work, there's an element of, I think you can probably learn curiosity, but there's also an element of just what is naturally curious to you, or what do you find naturally interesting. And if you're not finding that, maybe that's an indication that you are in the wrong field, or that you need to look at the problem in a new way. Maybe it's time to make some kind of change.
Yeah. There's another question out here. It says, I work in marketing analytics domain and worked on some problems which you discussed, but I feel marketing analytics doesn't get much appreciation as compared to data scientists. How do we project ourselves for better visibility? I think I've had one of my mentors who always told me is focus on the outcome. If you focus on the outcome, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I think businesses care about outcomes and impact. And having I've worked with data scientists who are who've been hey, let's do this hyperparameter tuning and we're going to get a higher output from the model. That's all good, but at the end of the day, it's about impact. And I think as a marketing analytics, as a analytics translator, focusing on outcome or impact, that truly drives kind of the value from data analytics, and the value is in the last mile, in that 5%. I think those roles, if you do it well, you'll be a partner and collaborator with your business unit.
I think that's a great statement and topic to end on here. That think, and we'll refer back. We've already referred to Jim Stern. Let's refer to him one more time. He's fond of saying, I've heard him say many times, that as analysts, we need to be focused on key outcomes in 3 particular areas: growing revenue, expanding margin or growing margin, and improving customer experience or customer satisfaction. And so if you're looking to make a difference, ask yourself, how is this work that I'm doing connected to growing revenue, cutting costs, or improving customer satisfaction? And if you're not clear on that, then maybe what you're doing isn't as impactful or as important as it needs to be. Go focus on something else that is expanding one of those areas.
Yeah, and I would like to just add on that. I've had another opportunity to have a mentor who actually, and these are his words, not mine. So I had this manager at Lenovo who once said, if you don't know what the strategy is, focus on the customer.
I love it.
you're confused about the strategy, focus on the customer, which was very poignant, because sometimes people, people down the line may not understand what corporate strategy is, and what are the strategic pillars and all of that stuff. But it's very simple advice for, if you don't know what's if you don't know what the strategy is, focus on the customer, like do the right thing by the customer, and translate that into analytics, because that's going to drive impact for the firm.
Love it.
And for the customer.
So thank you for that, Amit. Great question around projecting yourself for visibility. Focus on the customer, and also grow revenue, cut costs, improve customer satisfaction through analytics. Let's end it there. This has been an interesting conversation and topic. There's an emerging class of talent in the analytics space, that of data translator, helping to bridge the last mile. Ashish, thank you so much for joining and providing the impetus for this conversation.
David, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
As always, and thanks to our listeners and watchers. Course 5 Compass Live this is our 4th episode, so we're just getting started. Thank you for joining us in the foundation stage of our development. We will be back in 2021 with more exciting topics like this one. So signing off, David McBride from Course 5. Thanks, Ashish.
Thanks a lot, David.